Hi, my name's Lavera Crawley, and I've been asked to create for your cohort a presentation about a presentation that I gave for a group of chaplains on research literacy. Back in February of this year, I was asked to create a webinar for a national audience of hospital chaplains. There's been a culture change happening in the profession of chaplaincy. There's been this movement towards something called evidence-based care. Evidence-based care is using the current best evidence to help guide decisions and interventions in healthcare for individual patients. The evidence is based on research, and up to now, chaplaincy hasn't seen itself as being driven by evidence. Most chaplains are called to that work from a spiritual place. They see their role as practicing the art of spiritual companionship, and that means being fully present with people, being compassionate, offering them care and companionship. Not gathering evidence, not gathering data. As a result, there hasn't been a lot of robust evidence on whether what chaplains do is effective or not. And that's a problem with the profession that's situated within a larger system of healthcare where the language and currency is evidence. So there's a problem, and that's where I enter the picture. My background is I am a chaplain currently. I'm also a supervisor, meaning that I train chaplains. But before I became a chaplain, I was a physician and an ethicist, and most relevant to this conversation, I was a researcher. So I brought many years of research and experience in both teaching and doing research into this new profession of mine of chaplaincy. So I'm in a good space of being able to help bridge the two worlds. So I did that chaplaincy webinar, and what I've been asked to do for you is to model for you how a particular field, that is chaplaincy, approaches this whole idea of research and inquiry or knowledge. And I'm going to do this by showing you that actual presentation that I designed for chaplains on how to become research literate. So it gets a little crazy because I'm about to step out of my conversation with you and enter into that other presentation that I did, and I'm going to shift and presume you are now my chaplaincy audience. And I hope that that will make sense to you. So now I'm going to do this presentation about research literacy, and it's in two parts. The first is the introduction to research literacy, and the second part is how to speed read a research article. When I did this first presentation for chaplains, I did both of those parts together, and it's a pretty long presentation and very dense. So for us today, I'm only going to do part one, and stay tuned for part two because there'll be another video soon that will cover that part if you're interested. So let's start. I'm going to put on my chaplaincy training hat, and I'm going to ask you to put on your chaplaincy eyes and ears, and here we go. So hello again. I'm Lavera Crawley. I'm the Program Director of Palliative Care Education and Research at the Altavate Summit Medical Center in Berkeley, California. And this presentation today is on how to speed read a research article, beginning with the Beginner's Guide to Research Literacy. So there's several questions that come up when you think about entering into research world. First question is, all right, well, what are the different types of research? And that's what the first objective of this presentation will cover. We're going to identify the differences between types of research approaches. Okay, so now you know a little bit about the different kinds of research. So how do I actually find the published research literature? And once I even find where these articles are, how do I actually get my hands on one to read them? So that's the second objective, to identify strategies for finding and accessing articles relevant to chaplaincy or spiritual care. Once you know that, the whole world opens up to you. Whoa, now there's so many articles. Now that you know how to find them and access them, how on earth are you going to keep up? And that's what the third objective, which will be covered in the second video, is about. Learning how to speed read an article. So here are the three objectives. The first two we'll cover in this video. Identifying the differences between types of research approaches and identifying strategies for finding research literature and accessing literature relevant to chaplaincy or spiritual care. And once again, in a separate video, you'll use the method for speed reading to now be able to read all these different articles that you can access. So let's start with the first one. What are the different types of research approaches? Now, there's several different ways we could answer this question, but I'm only going to cover two. First is looking at different types of methods. And the second will be looking at different levels of evidence. But starting with the methods. Here's a chart that compares different approaches to doing research. There's qualitative and there's quantitative. If I wanted to make it a busier slide, I would have added another column next to quantitative, and I'd called it mixed, because it's just that, where you do a combination of qualitative and quantitative. But I also added, I wanted you to know about another column, big data, and we'll get to that in a minute. But let's start first with how they differ. Qualitative research has one purpose, and it's just to discover ideas. The approach you're going to use for that is to observe and interpret what you see or what you hear, whatever you've observed. The data that you collect is generally unstructured. It's free form. For example, you'll collect someone's story or you'll ask them a bunch of open-ended questions. And so what you get is a lot of text. Maybe you could even ask people to draw pictures. There's all sorts of ways that you could get data in, and it's not going to be structured. And when I say structured, that's what you get in quantitative, and I'll get to that in a minute, but I want to just say structured would be like a survey that has a same question. Everybody who's who's a research participant is answering the same structured question. But back to qualitative. So it's usually unstructured. The role of the researcher in qualitative is really important. You are intimately involved. If you're asking someone to tell you something intimate about their life, tell their life story, they're going to respond to you. Your very presence is going to change the way, it's going to have an impact on the way they tell that story. Such that if someone else comes in completely different, they'll tell that story or maybe a little bit differently because of that person. So researchers are intimately involved. And the results are generally subjective. The way you choose participants in a qualitative qualitative research project is usually it's going to be small numbers of people, small sample sizes, and you're going to purposefully choose them. It's not going to be random. You're going to actually want people because you're trying to observe a phenomena, and so you want to purposefully find people where you can observe that phenomenon. As a result, you cannot generalize the findings you get from a qualitative study. It's the only purpose, we'll go back to that again, it's just to give you some ideas, to discover ideas about something. If you want to become more structured, more you've got some ideas and now you want to test to see how generalizable or under what conditions these ideas actually flourish. You're moving into a quantitative approach. The purpose is to test hypotheses or to be able to predict some kind of measurable outcome. So the approach is you're going to measure things and test things. You're collecting data that's generally structured, So like I said, surveys where you're answering the same question and maybe you're saying how much you like, sometimes, never, that sort of thing. Or they're actually measuring something with a number, a biometric, like a blood pressure or a weight or various other things that they can measure about your body. People like to think that the researcher is an uninvolved observer in quantitative, but I don't believe it, because just by the nature of the research itself, the questions that are being asked, the researcher is there in the process in some kind of way. But for the most part, they think that they're uninvolved, and so the results are generally objective. You have to have large sample sizes, and they have to be chosen scientifically, that is, like statistically, in order to be able to generalize across a wider swath than you could just with the qualitative. So that's qualitative and quantitative. You can have a combination of them where you first discover an idea. So let's say you wanted to understand a little bit about hope and how hope differs across cultures. So the first thing you're going to do is a qualitative approach to begin to look at, well, how are certain populations talking about hope? Under what conditions does hope even come up? What language are they using? What are the concepts here? And you're just discovering those ideas. And then once you have a good sense of them from a good qualitative study, you might want to pick out certain qualities around hope, and maybe you want to create a survey, a scale by which you can measure how much hope someone has or how hope changes over time. You would then use a quantitative approach to that. But you've used them in combination. And there are other ways that you can have a mixed models, which I won't go into, but you can have some idea of the possibilities. The other column there I put because this is a trend. It's been going on for some time now, and it's getting bigger and bigger, and this is big data. I'm sure you've heard the term. If not, now that I've put it in your mind, you're going to see it everywhere. The idea of big data is to identify trends and patterns in order to predict outcomes. A place where it's used a lot is in marketing. You may wonder why you went shopping online, window shopping online at a certain store, looking at a certain thing, or a search engine that you used where you typed in some search terms and then went to various websites. And then a few days later, you may open up Facebook or you may open up something else and boom, there's an ad for the very things you had been searching for. This is a process of what big data is doing, and they're using it to identify trends and patterns in order to predict outcomes. And in marketing, the hope the outcome is that you'll buy something. The approach is to visualize large amounts of data. And the data that's collected is both structured and unstructured. Some of it could be streaming data. Some of it could be social media data. This is a place where the researcher has no involvement with the participants, although, again, both what they're looking for, the fact that they're looking for certain and collecting certain data, they've already made some decisions, so the researcher is involved. But the results can be both subjective and objective, both qualitative and quantitative. These are extremely large data sets, terabytes of raw data. And participants are generally unaware of their participation. You don't know that when you're clicking through things that you're providing data. You don't know that when your GPS is used on your smartphone that you're putting data in the cloud, that they're using large amounts of data to determine traffic patterns. And you're not aware that you're doing that. You should be, but most of us don't read those terms of agreement where we're telling them that, yeah, you can take my data and use it for big data. It's also being used in healthcare as well. All the genomics, all the new omics like microbiomics, they're collecting billions of data points about the human gene and making connections and looking at patterns to predict disease patterns, etc. So it's happening. It's the new trend. I want you to be aware of it. So this is the first type of research approach comparing these methods. The second type is levels of clinical evidence. So set aside whether we're talking about qualitative or quantitative or big data for the moment. We're now talking about the quality of evidence. At the bottom of this pyramid, I have written clinical experience. This is what most chaplains would say guides them, their own experience, their own bedside experience, what they've learned from themselves that works. That's good. There's more when you begin to have the more seasoned professionals coming together and offering their expert opinion. It's multiple people coming together, or the more learned of those who are offering opinion. A little bit more than just an individual's clinical experience. We're adding more complexity now. And then if we begin to collect a lot of different cases, you're getting a little different, something's shifting here. We're getting more refined in the amount of information we're getting. It's not just one individual's clinical experience in the bottom now. We're having multiple cases and looking at differences in the cases. This is now leading us to the more traditional research studies, the observational studies. You see this a lot of in epidemiology or in cohort studies, where you're observing, say, how many people got an illness after they ate at a particular picnic. And you're starting to use more quantitative as well as some qualitative observational tools and some simple statistics at this point. If we want to move up the pyramid, we now go to something that's called the randomized controlled trials. When I first entered medicine, this was the top of the pyramid. This was considered the gold standard. This is where you're doing an experiment where you're comparing, say, drug A to drug B, medicine A to medicine B. Let's say medicine B is the new medicine, and medicine A is what's been used all along. And you want to know whether your medicine, this new B pill, is going to be better. And so you have to do a randomized controlled trial where this is now definitely a quantitative study, and you're going to give some people the new medicine, and then other people, your control group, would not have it, and you're going to then measure some outcomes. That used to be the gold standard. Now the gold standard is the top of the pyramid, the systematic review, which is simply pooling together large numbers of randomized controlled trials. So what is happening in this pyramid is that the quality, I should say the robustness is a better word, the robustness of the evidence is increasing as you move up the pyramid. And the other thing I could say is bias decreases as you go up the pyramid, or it increases as you go down the pyramid. So this is important, and I want you to remember just take a snapshot with your eye of this pyramid, because we're going to see it again. So that's all I want to say about the different types of research. And if we were doing this as the regular chaplaincy seminar or webinar, I would stop and see if there are any questions. But I'm going to say if there are any questions, you might want to pause the video if you're watching it with a friend. Maybe you guys can have a conversation about it right now, or just jot down your question and perhaps you can ask your instructor later. But let's move back to the webinar. So we've identified differences between types of research approaches. Now let's go to the second objective, which is to identify strategies for finding research literature and accessing the articles relevant to chaplaincy or spiritual care. And I'd like for you to begin to think about what strategies do you already know? What do you already use when you need to find research literature? For chaplains, the question is, how can you find published articles? And one place to start is your professional organization. There's the National Association of Catholic Chaplains, or the National Association of Jewish Chaplains, or the Association of Professional Chaplains. All these professional organizations generally will have a professional journal, maybe even have journal clubs, online journal clubs. They have a list of publications, and they certainly have websites. And all of those can be sources where you can find research articles. Another place to find published articles is my favorite, which are libraries and librarians. I love this button. It says the librarian is the original search engine. Many chaplains are fortunate to work in hospitals that will actually have a library and a librarian on staff. If not, there may be some nearby university libraries that you can affiliate or you can get a membership for. And I don't want to tell you to forget about your where you went to school before, because you could have alumni privileges at your alma mater. And also don't underestimate the power of just a simple local public library, because they have not only the original but very powerful search engines in the librarians who are there. This is some hospitals are actually university hospitals, and so there they get the best of all worlds because they have a big university library. But even those in training, students who are in training at university hospitals, then they leave and go out to the community. They don't have a hospital that perhaps has a library, and they're not near a university. So there's a lot of problems like that. So I want people to begin thinking about library strategies, and don't underestimate, as I said, your public library, because the librarians can be of great help. So begin to think about any other library strategies you have. At CIIS, I'm stepping back out of my role as the chaplain here. At CIIS, you're very lucky to have a world-class library and librarians who can help you. But stepping back into my chaplain. Okay, so another way, so we've got libraries, we've got professional organizations. Another is to find a certain set of journals that are of interest to you and subscribe to their table of contents. You can identify the top journals in your field or your relevant field. You go to the home page of those journals. All journals have websites now. And then you subscribe to their table of content alerts. If you're in chaplaincy, this is a reference to an article, the Journal of Healthcare Chaplaincy, back in 2011, because they did an article that analyzed all sorts of journals that published a lot of things, and they looked for chaplaincy relevant articles. So they now have a list of the top journals that publish things that are relevant to chaplaincy. So how would you do this table of contents search? So here is a web page. I'm sure it doesn't show up that great, but here it is from that Journal of Healthcare Chaplaincy. And like this journal, most journals will provide an email service that can alert you whenever new content is available. So you just go to their website and you just search, because some people are going to call it table of contents. Somebody else is going to say, oh, alert me, which is what the Journal of Healthcare Chaplaincy is. I had to find something and I saw alert me. I clicked on it. I've circled it here so you can see it. And then once I clicked on it, it said new content email alert. I click on that. I give them my email address. And now whenever the Journal of Healthcare Chaplaincy has a new issue coming out, they'll send you the table of contents. And you can look to see, oh, okay, what's new in this journal and what's relevant? Oh, I might want to read this or that article. So this is a way of kind of keeping up with that. And again, what's another way to find a published article? You can go online searches. Now, I've already talked about professional journals, so you can actually go back to that journal and search it. So here's that journal again, Journal of Healthcare Chaplaincy. You can see up at the top, they have a search bar. So you can just put in any word you want and click on search, and it will search both current and back issues of that journal for that particular content. So that's another way of searching. You can also use browser search engines, but beware. You want to use a scholarly database like Google Scholar. You don't want to use Google or Bing. So it's best to use a scholarly database. And the reason is because I don't know what you think about Google searches and Bing searches these days, but it's a lot of junk. People are trying to monetize their websites, and so they'll do all sorts of things. They learn the tricks of the algorithm so that most of the commercial things are the things that pop up first. And we're not interested in commercial things. We're interested in information. So you need to go to a scholarly database. Google Scholar is one. There are a lot of other ones that are much better. So here's a brief introduction to scholarly databases. The vast amounts of research literature are indexed and organized into searchable databases. So I want you to visualize there's actually a human being that's going through, okay, maybe now they've created a machine that does this, but there's still someone who's kind of overlooking the machine to make sure that each article that's coming out in a journal is indexed for some keywords or topics or subject headings. And they'll put those keywords, topics, subject headings, etc. into a database so that we can search them. The databases are usually subject or discipline specific. For example, there's CIIS, which stands for the Cumulative Index to Nursing and Allied Health. There's Medline Plus, which is the discipline for that is medicine. There are a whole bunch of others. There's education, psychology, etc. But those are just examples. Even some of these databases then are aggregated into larger bundles. For example, Ovid is a database that has multiple. It's a bundle that has bundled up a lot of different databases. And so is PubMed. Some of these scholarly databases are free to use, and others require subscriptions. And that's another reason to get to know a librarian and a library, because if you want to search Ovid, it's going to cost you. If you want to have access to it as an individual, it's going to cost you thousands of dollars. So let's forget that. But your librarian may subscribe to it. Or a librarian. I had a librarian at our hospital who, our hospital didn't subscribe to some of these databases, but she actually had her own access to UC Berkeley, so she could go through that. So that's what I'm saying, librarians are golden. So here's an example of a free scholarly database. It is the premier free aggregated database for medicine and healthcare, and it's called PubMed. And it's made by the federal government through the National Library of Medicine, and that's the URL for it, pubmed.gov. And there's a sample screenshot of what that page is about. If you want to learn how to use PubMed, it's pretty simple, but it's got many more bells and whistles than just a simple search box. So you could go to that first page and look on the side where it has lots of tutorials and frequently asked questions and ways that you can learn how to use PubMed. You can also go to YouTube and learn how to do anything by going to YouTube and typing it in. So if you went to YouTube and put PubMed, a lot of folks have made videos on how to use PubMed. Here's another one that I discovered recently, and it's called TRIP, which stands for Turning Research into Practice. It's another freebie, although you can pay a little bit of money. I think it's $40 a year. Don't quote me. I haven't joined it, but I do use it for free. But if you pay for a small amount of money, you get a little bit more bells and whistles with it. But the freebie is a very good product. And I'm not in any way, I don't have any stock in the company, so I don't benefit from what I'm saying. I just think it's really great, and I'm going to show you why. So I just, for example, in the TRIP, this is a screenshot of the TRIP database. I put the word spiritual in on the freebie and clicked search, and it gave me 2,517 articles that they organized by quality. Remember that pyramid I asked you to take a photo of? So they've organized it by the different levels of quality. And over here on the side, they are showing you the evidence base, the evidence type. There's systematic review. Remember, that was the top of the pyramid. And if you look here on the side, you'll see still in that circle, but next to the article itself, you'll see the hint of a little paragraph. A pyramid. I don't know if it's showing up for you really well here, but just to highlight it, you remember that I showed you that there were some differences in the levels of research. As you go up the pyramid, you're increasing the quality or robustness of the evidence. As you go down, you are increasing the bias. So they're actually, what TRIP does is not only does it give you the articles, but it gives you the level of evidence of any particular article. So that's what I had mentioned when I said keep that pyramid in mind. That's why I really like TRIP. TRIP also will give you a link to the full text, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But, well, in fact, we'll get to that now. So you know now how to get a bunch of articles. You go to a scholarly database, you can go to your professional journals, etc., etc. So now, once you get the list of articles that you might want to get, how do you actually get them out of the computer and into your hand or onto a screen with a full article where you can read it? So in other words, how do you access the full text? Some articles are published as what's called open access. That means you can download the full article for free. I just want to tell you, it might be free to you, but somebody's had to pay for that down the road. Most likely it's the author. I know for many of the publications that I put out, if I wanted them to be free access, I had to pay sometimes up to $2,000 per article that I submitted to the publisher so that the public could get it for free. So somebody's paying for it down there. So there's no free lunch here. But if the publisher or the author has paid for you to have open access, that's really great, because then you can download it for free. And I think that's how it should be. Other articles are not open access, which means if you want to access them, you'll have to pay for them. So how do you get to your hands on an article? Here's where your library membership or your librarian can help. As I said, our librarian at our hospital could go through UC Berkeley and get a lot of articles for us. So never underestimate the power of a librarian. Now here's an exception where Google or Bing might help. So say you've discovered an article you want, you've got the title of it, and you've got the author. Well, you could Google. Sometimes if you Google the title, somebody else may have a PDF of it. If you Google the author, you might be able to find the author's own webpage, and sometimes they then can make the articles available from their webpage. You can also write the article, the author, and ask, send an email and say, I've loved your article. I'm wondering if you could email me a PDF version of it. But if all else fails, does your department have a budget? Because you can, they are available to buy. You can get it pricey though. So, what have we done so far? We've identified the differences between types of research approaches. We looked at qualitative, quantitative, and I've mentioned mixed and big data as differences in methods. And then we've looked at differences in quality or robustness, looking at the different levels of evidence. And then the second objective is we've identified strategies for finding and accessing research articles. You can find them in your through your professional organizations, through librarians and librarians, through table of content alerts, and through searching online databases. I gave an example of PubMed and TRIP. So, the next article video is going to be about part 2, using a method for speed reading research articles. And I want to give you a little hint about that. The research enterprise can create well over 1 million new articles every year. And in any given health profession, this could mean needing to keep up with tens of thousands of articles a year, because you do want to keep up. And in chaplaincy, although the number of evidence-based chaplaincy articles that's published each year is still a relatively manageable number, the task of it's going to grow, and not only that, the task of keeping up can really get out of hand if you start searching related disciplines like medicine or nursing or social work or other professional literatures for studies that are relevant for spiritual care. So what's a chaplain to do to try to keep up with this pace? Physicians have to keep up with a lot of information, and they've learned how to do it by speed reading. Generally going to glean the gist of an article and then quickly determine if the entire article should be read in more detail. So I'm going to stop here. It's a good place to pause, because I've covered now really the beginner's guide to research literacy. And I'm going to invite you to stay tuned for part 2, which is where we're going to use a method for learning how to speed read. Thank you.